Hi and welcome to the HR and CQ Show podcast. Today we're going to talk about end of service benefits. And the reason for that is that, as most of you know, Sarah and I run the HR and CQ events, the Breakfast Bites and Summit. And throughout those events, we often allow for a Q&A session. And it's one of the questions that's come up time and time again. So we decided that we were going to cover it in one of our episodes. So Sarah, being the employment law guru that she is, I'd hope you would agree with me that she is the expert when it comes to answering that question. So, Sarah, I suppose over to you. The first thing that would probably be most helpful is for everyone to understand what are the legal requirements around employee end of year benefits.
So end of service benefits, to explain what they are, first of all, we have essentially when somebody finishes employment, whether they've resigned or whether they're terminated, whether they're under a free zone company or a mainland company, and this also applies to DIFC and ADGM, they are eligible to receive certain payments. Part of that payment, it can be classified as end of service benefits. It can also be a final salary or final settlement. The final salary, final settlement usually is the last month's salary payment that's needed, okay, or any outstanding salary that's needed. And then also any annual leave outstanding balance that needs to be paid out as well, and that will be paid out on basic salary. And then the big part of it, which is the end of service benefits, generally speaking, which is called the gratuity. And this is essentially a savings scheme, for want of a better word. It's the equivalent of a pension that you might get, or a contribution towards a pension that you might get in other countries, that is defined by the UAE labour law in Article 51 for full-time employees and Article 52 for part-time employees, and is structured around your last salary, essentially. So this is a legal obligation. There's no get-out clause anymore. There's no if, buts and maybes around it. Like if you work for an employer for a year minimum, you get paid it. That's the facts of it.
Yeah, and you and I were talking off camera about situations where companies just haven't got the funds or the means to pay gratuity, and we both agreed that was just a lack of preparation, basically, wasn't it? But yeah, you want to add your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so what companies ought to be doing, and I do appreciate a lot of larger companies do this, and it tends to be the sort of smaller startup, medium-sized businesses that don't do this because of a lack of awareness or lack of preparation, as you mentioned.
Or just lack of funds at the beginning of your bootstrapping an organisation.
Yeah, exactly. And that is to make accruals on a monthly basis. So to set it up and think about if somebody's salary is X, then what is the gratuity? And because when we hire people, we don't hire them with the expectation they're going to leave before a year. We'd really like them to stay with us for longer.
Of course.
So putting that provision aside in your finances, either physically putting money into a separate bank account, or at least putting money into, documenting it and retaining that balance in your account, so that when people do resign or get terminated from a business, even if, God forbid, a business collapses and has to go into liquidation, that money is still there to pay for the gratuity for the employees because it's a legal obligation. During COVID, with so many companies that went broke, unfortunately, because of the circumstances, this was one of the challenges that they faced, that they just didn't have the money to pay the gratuity. And with the length of service that you have, if you have somebody that's more senior with a higher length of service, that gratuity number can get into sensible amounts of cash. We're not talking, tens of thousands of dirhams on occasion. So it's not sort of pocket money that you have hanging around, but you do need to make provisions for it.
And I've noticed in the market recently that there's a number of new, different alternative options that are becoming available to organisations. So perhaps you could tell us what you're aware of in terms of that, and is it legal, for example? Some employees may not understand what those alternative options are, and they may question, well, can my company offer this? And is that the only option that's available to me, and so on?
Sure. So these options, we already have one available in the marketplace, and it's called DUES, which is for the DIFC, and it's the most common. And that was kind of like the testing ground, I think, for that type of structure. And it is essentially mimicking a pension investment scheme that you would have in other countries, where the employer pays into it your gratuity amount on a monthly basis. The fund is then managed, it's taken care of, but it is solely handed over as responsibility or accessibility to the employee. So you are then able to access the funds that are there. You can contribute more as well. You can then take that fund to other employers when you move, not within DIFC, yes, at the moment, outside of DIFC, no, but with the new products that are coming online for mainland companies, that will be available, that it can be moved from company to company. So you could have a gratuity with one company and then you move to a new employer and take that gratuity with you. So you decide not to take that pot of cash out, but then you continue contributing to it. I believe there are opportunities for investing and developing that money further, that you as an employee can take the decision with that company to then the investment company to then increase your pot of money even further. So it's kind of like a bit more of a pension saving scheme, a bit more structured than leaving it down to the company.
And it means that I suppose they're investing every month, and
yes.
There isn't then, as an organisation, that concern then at the end when somebody is leaving, where are we going to find the funds from? Because you've been investing in this programme every month
according to the salary. And like there's a couple of if they're structured the same way as the DIFC one are at the moment, and let's just backtrack a second. So at the moment, there are a number of companies, there are more investment companies coming out with such products. The Ministry of Human Resources is encouraging private sector companies to facilitate of these products and to use them. It is not yet a mandate, but I believe it will become one, probably towards the end of this year, next year. At the moment, they're just giving a sounding board out to see how readily companies are adopting it. They know it works because it works in DIFC. So they will become available, and they are available, they will become mandated. The things to think about is that with these, you have a probation period of 3 or 4 or 6 months. You don't have to pay in the gratuity within that 6-month period. But when somebody completes a 6-month period, you then have to pay in the gratuity amount for that 6 months, right? And even though there is within the legislation an eligibility for gratuity payable after 1 year's employment, with these schemes, at least with the DIFC scheme, it's available to the employees before that 1 year. So at the moment, this is why it's a bit of a catch-22, because at the moment, if a company takes somebody on, they don't have to pay gratuity or think about paying anything or putting, like physically having the cash until you get to day 365. Whereas with these schemes, you need to think about it from day 180, which is after the 6 months, and then every month thereafter, as long as the person is employed. So there's a little bit more of an immediacy about the financial burden that is on the companies if they choose to go ahead with these things, but it means there is security for the employees as well. So there's like a bit of a knife edge, if you see what I mean. Like it's because there's benefits for both sides, but there's also that negative element of having that financial fluidity.
So we've talked about end of service benefits from the point of view of the organisation. What's their legal obligation, and how should it be paid? What the alternatives are. I suppose one of the things that we often hear is where an employee is not maybe being treated fairly when it comes to their end of service, and what perhaps they believe they're entitled to is the employer is doing their level best to avoid having to make that payment. So under what circumstances might it be that an end of service isn't due to an employee? And I suppose, where does an employee go if they're having issues with their employer making that payment, and they want to kind of fight for that gratuity payment they believe they're due?
So within the labour law that's in place at the moment, there is no clause that allows a company to, in its entirety, forfeit somebody's end-of-service gratuity payment. And I'm quite particular about my terminology there, because under the old labour law in Article 120, which was the arbitrary gross misconduct clause and articles, if somebody was terminated under that, then their gratuity could be forfeit legally, regardless of length of service, regardless of whatever, because of that nature of termination and the gross misconduct dismissal. Now, when the labour law was reissued, and we're talking Federal Decree 33 of number 20 of year 2021, in Articles 51 and 52, it mentions about the eligibility for how it's calculated for gratuity.
I'm laughing because every time you have to recite a number, you kind of go into this visual zone, and I can see that you're visualising the different articles and the numbers, and you've obviously memorised them, and so I'm like watching your face as you think, what's the number that I need to quote right now? So anyway, sorry, not to put you off your stride.
That's okay. So Article 20 was replaced with Article 44, which is still the disciplinary and gross misconduct article, and in the majority of the clauses within the article are very similar. There's a few adjustments between the two legislations. The one notable omission from Article 44 is the fact that you do not have the legal right to forfeit somebody's gratuity. Now, because it's not mentioned, it means that it's protected, right? I have a lot of queries from other HR professionals and employees and employers alike who say, yes, but, and it's like, okay, the law is quite clear in not saying something, therefore you can't do it because it's not written, if that makes sense. It's kind of a double negative almost. Now, if an employee owes money to the company, has overconsumption of annual leave, for example, has taken extra housing allowance as a loan, for example, has maybe done a training bond with them, that they've taken some training and agreed that if they leave within a certain time that it can be recovered. Or that, that training bond also is mentioned in the contract of employment. Or that there is damage to property and belongings of the company on leaving. They drop the laptop, it needs replacing type thing. Or in case there is any court instructed deductions that need to be made from an unrelated court hearing, could be civil, could be something else like this, like, recovery for dues or something or other. Those are, as a brief overview, those are the individual deductions that can legally be made from somebody's end of service benefit, so from somebody's gratuity.
But not a complete exhausted list. So
no. There's other things.
But
yeah, that's
as some examples.
Key ones. Yeah. They're the key ones I can remember. So in those instances, a company, and the law is very prescriptive on what can be deducted. And if it's not written down, it can't be deducted. It's that kind of thing. So people saying, oh, well, you took half a day, or companies will come up with lots of different ideas as to what they can and can't deduct. Mm-hmm. If it's not in the list, you can't deduct it. Okay. Right? So those are the legal deductions. That's the only way. And the only way that an employee would lose the entire gratuity is if, I would suspect, it was a perfect storm of all of those incidents, that it would match the value of the gratuity. Okay. A company can't invent these things either. You have to have signed a legal agreement about, like, a training bond, or, yes, I agree that if I broke, the laptop was damaged willfully rather than by accident or through lifespan or something or other.
And I think, like, for example, with the training as well, it's not just any old training. No. It has to be, like, for example, if they paid for your MBA or something like that, then but it's not like I was thinking, if they've put you on a kind of health and safety course, and all the staff of going on this course, then those sort of things cannot be deducted. It's quite specific stuff where you've entered into a kind of contractual agreement with them that if you put me through this training, I sign to agree I'm going to pay it back.
There's two sides of it, and you're quite correct. There's one element which is some companies will put a clause in the employment contract that says if you leave within X number of years, usually 2 years, we will recover Y amount of training expenses from you, and it's very generalised as training expenses. And then you've got the type of training bond bond that you're talking about, which is for a more professional type qualification, like an MBA, as you mentioned, which is a separate documentation, and it's an agreement of exactly that nature, but outside of the contract. In the training bond side of things is a bit more structured in terms of it is this course and that is the output, and it's confirmed and agreed. The clause in the employment contract is a little bit more airy-fairy, if you like, a little bit more grey, because it just mentions training expenses. A lot of companies will try and utilise that to recover visa expenses, which I think we've mentioned before, and I'm happy to mention again, because people need to be aware that it's not legal, and employees need to be aware that it's not legal so they can challenge it. But in those instances, a company needs to provide, it's my understanding that a company needs to provide invoices
for the training.
And it's not me doing an orientation onboarding training for a new employee joining and producing an internal invoice saying, well, my time as a trainer is X. It is actually, I'm hiring Emma to come in and do this training and give you a qualification, and here's Emma's invoice with the certificate, and that then qualifies us to recover that money. I also understand that the value that's there is then applied pro rata. So the longer you and it's a bit, I've heard of people who have been told, no, you need to pay the full 5,000 dirhams. You've only been there 3 weeks. When queried with the Ministry of Human Resources, they've said, no, don't be silly. They prorated it down. It ends up as 200 or 300 dirhams.
Right.
Okay. So it's like, it prorated both ways, I think, depending on who you speak to at MOHRE. But it's a pro rata amount. So those are the two differences with those trainings.
Okay. So we talked about then what are the reasons why they could potentially refuse to pay it. What does an employee do then if they're in that sort of situation where they feel like they're entitled to a gratuity payment, but their employer is saying, no, we're not paying it for XYZ reason?
So the first point of call, if you're a mainland company, is Ministry of Human Resources. Call the call centre, get on the WhatsApp. There's lots of routes that you can raise a query and a complaint, and I strongly recommend you calling them. They're very, very helpful. They will give you the best advice that they can with regards to your situation. You need to make sure you're clear and transparent about what your situation is so that they can understand it as clearly as possible. They will support you if there is a claim, and they will raise a complaint and mediate as far as possible with your employer. If it's under 50,000 dirhams, then it will be through mediation. If it's more than that as a value of a claim, then it will go to a court case. But as an employee, you wouldn't pay anything. So it's worth still making that phone call. If you are a free zone company, then you need to reach out to the relevant free zone authority. So, for example, in DMCC, they have the mediation team. So you reach out to them. They can take your query, give you feedback, and then hold that mediation discussion with your employer to make sure that they follow the rules, the law, and support you with your claim. But sometimes we don't always understand everything, and sometimes we expect MOHRE or we expect the mediation teams to be on our side, when actually, because we've misunderstood, they're not. So don't be afraid to call up just to get more clarity and more information, but also understand that sometimes
you might be wrong.
We might be wrong. You know, as much as we think we are eligible to receive this gratuity, there may be something that what the company is doing is right.
And is there somewhere you can recommend? Is there a website or anything people can go to determine the calculation if they think I feel like I'm being offered a gratuity payment which is considerably less than what I was expecting it to be? It probably could be that the employee is miscalculating the gratuity payments. Is there a way that they can go somewhere and have a look on a website?
Yeah, the Ministry of Human Resources has a gratuity calculator on it, so you can go and look at that one. There's a couple of others that are floating around the internet as well. You put your start date in, your finish date in, and you put your current basic salary in, and it will work it out. It's not going to be exact to the fill or to the, there might be a couple of dirhams out, but generally it'll give you a really good ballpark figure as to this is what's correct. Obviously, if you've had unpaid leave days, then that will be deducted from your duration of employment, which might skew the calculation, but that's a good place to go to get that information.
But I think actually you make a good point there about it being based on the basic salary, because those that have been here for a number of years that have perhaps received gratuity from previous employers will appreciate that it's based on the basic salary. But anybody that's perhaps only been here for the past year or 2 years may not fully understand that your gratuity payment is based on basic and doesn't include accommodation or transport allowance or any other allowances that you're entitled to. So Absolutely. It might then mean what you're expecting to get is considerably less than what you're actually being
definitely
given. Yeah.
So I think we've covered lots of points, but I want to have a conversation with you around this, because I see, and I speak with a number of different employees and different employers and what have you, from a cultural perspective, how can we help employees and employers understand the kind of stuff that we're talking about?
Yeah, so different people's cultural values will obviously determine the way that they would approach this kind of conversation. Employees that come from a more authority-orientated culture where communication is more indirect, they probably don't feel the freedom to go and approach their HR team and ask those simple questions like, can you tell me how this gratuity payment has been calculated? Which, as an employee, you're more than within your rights to go to HR and ask. But they won't necessarily feel the freedom to speak up and have that conversation because they're concerned that it might appear like they're challenging what's being communicated to them. So if we are HR leaders within an organisation, I think our responsibility is to, freely provide some of that information up front and not wait for it to be asked for, acknowledging that some people won't feel the freedom to ask for it. When a gratuity payment is being provided, does somebody from the HR team sit down with the employee and say, this is how it's been calculated? Do you understand? Can I give you any further information? Just so that an employee feels comfortable with that their end of service is being correctly handled, ethically handled, and they feel informed as well. So I think that would be my first point. The second point then is to the employee, just say you do have that freedom to go to HR and speak to them. If you don't feel comfortable with that, then, as you've said, then there is the Ministry of Human Resources website where people can go and check the calculation to make sure that it's correct. If you're not sure exactly what your basic salary is when it's broken down into different sections or different payments, that will all be on their payslip, so they can obtain the information there and then utilise that to go to the website to check the calculation. And then if at that point they don't feel it's correct, they do have that option to go to HR. But again, if they don't feel the freedom to do that, is there a colleague or do they feel comfortable speaking to their supervisor about it, who can then go and represent them with the HR team? But I think my biggest point is to try and remind people that your HR team is supposed to be there to support you. They are your people. And so although you may not have ever had to go and speak to them before, you may not even know where their office is, for example, they are there to support and help you.
Yeah, no, I think that's really valid points. And from a cultural perspective, it's equally important to make sure that people feel free to come and speak with HR. The one final point I didn't mention that I wanted to mention is with regards to, and you've just nudged a memory in my brain, is about the signing of the gratuity.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, because we were talking about this before. So your HR should present you with a document which defines what your final settlement is. You can sign to say you agree the amount. Do not sign to say you've received the money when you haven't. Even if they pressure you. The legal process is that you receive your final settlement and end of service benefits within 14 calendar days of your last working day. Then, and only then, does the company cancel your work permit and any visas, right? Because part of that cancellation process, you have to sign a piece of paper that says, I've received my final settlement. Yeah. If you haven't had it, don't sign it, right? And if a company doesn't do that way, then you get in touch with. If you haven't received your final settlement, even as a presentation of a number on the 15th day after you stop working, your last working day, and your last day of employment, I'm going to clarify that, not your last working day, your last day of employment, right? Because you might decide not to go into work, but your last day of employment, then you can raise a query as non-payment, but don't sign until you've received your money.
Yeah, and I think on that then, from a cultural perspective, there may be that pressure if people come from a more authority-orientated culture to just sign if somebody more senior than you has said that, this is what you have to do. And they may not feel the freedom to push back and say, hang on a minute, I'm not signing. So another thing that HR leaders can do is make sure that the process is outlined either on the intranet or, it's part of your employee handbook, if people still have those, that kind of says, this is how this will be handled if you were to choose to leave. And so an individual employee can look at that and, follow it step by step. This is what's happened. This hasn't happened yet. And then they can even show that employee handbook to their supervisor and say, look, this is the situation. This process hasn't been followed.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I suppose the other slightly newer policy that's being introduced into DIFC and to ADGM is the whistleblower policy.
Yep.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So for those that don't know, the whistleblower policy it's a universal global policy that's put in place within companies. It allows and supports individuals within a company or externals to a company to flag up and highlight that a company is doing something wrong, either in breach of its own internal policies, in breach of some government regulations, in breach of country laws, whatever it might be, okay? Yeah. And as of today, at the time of recording, ADGM and DIFC now legally, every company has to have a whistleblower policy in place. And then outside of that, at the moment, it's not enforced within mainland and other free zones, but I strongly recommend that it's good business practice to have a whistleblower policy. It shows a maturity of carrying out business. It gives psychological safety to your employees to be able to stand up and call out mistakes and say that there are problems. If you set up a whistleblower policy, don't just pay it lip service, as we would say. It's not just a tick box exercise. You need to actually allow people to utilise it and don't penalise them for utilising it.
Yeah.
I've had 2 people in the last 9 months, right? And 9 months sounds like a long time, but 2 people in senior HR roles who I've spoken to who have both whistleblown in their profession and have then been terminated because they whistleblew. Right. That's just not cricket. That's not the right application of a whistleblower.
It's not meant to be a policy that's then used against employees.
No, not at all. Well, yes and no. Yes, if you're the person doing something wrong, but no if you're the person reporting it.
Yeah, not if you're the whistleblower.
Yes, exactly. But again, I think it needs to be carefully managed from a cultural perspective with the communication side of things. And you're better placed than me to give that explanation of the nuances that need to be taken care of in how you can facilitate that whistleblower being accessible and enforceable to the whole community of employees.
Yeah, I think, again, back to this, authority-orientated culture, individuals who then do speak up might be really heavily frowned upon by the senior leaders that they report to. And we need to make sure that we're kind of communicating to the leaders within the organisation what this policy entails, why it's being introduced, and the importance of the fact that actually this is a good thing if employees report wrongdoings or misdemeanours, because ultimately they are whistleblown because they're trying to make something either safer, more legal, they're
removing risks.
Yeah, they're trying to make positive changes within the organisation. So we need to make sure that we're then championing those. But again, HR need to be communicating that to the leadership team, regardless of whether the leadership team is more authority orientated or more like collaborative, like flatter culture, everyone needs to be saying the same thing, that actually this is a positive thing, that people feel the freedom to share their concerns about risk.
And I think having multiple routes of communication would reinforce that. So having maybe an email, maybe having I don't know, I'm just spitballing here, but like a comments box, for example, at the very lowest level, having a survey that could be filled in, or a chatbot on WhatsApp or something or other like this.
Not unanimous. Anonymous is the word I was looking for.
Might be unanimous.
Anonymous opportunities to share.
Yeah. No, and I think that works well. So I think we've had a really great conversation today, answering some of the questions from our Breakfast Bites events from both September and the more recent one in January, which I can't believe was like literally not even a month ago now.
And we've got the summit coming up, actually.
Oh yeah, just drop that one in. So we've had really great conversations around end of service benefits and gratuity and what that looks like, and then a brief touch on whistleblowing. We're going to have more conversations in the next episodes, answering more of your questions from the Breakfast Bites events that we've compiled. So we look forward to seeing you again for the next episode of the HR and CQ show.